Liam's looking at his options for next year. Of course, there's a lot of interest, and rightly so. Look, it looks, I think, more likely than not that he'll move on this summer, and he has interest from pretty much every club. If he stays with us, we'll be delighted. And if we move on this summer, then it'll be a positive sign for the club, a positive step for the club to have developed and sold a player at that sort of level.
It's been good. I think the boys are looking forward to the final match. One more push, and we'll do everything we can to win the game. We want to finish as high as we can. A win would help us move up a place, maybe, but nevertheless, a win keeps us where we are, and we're going for that for sure. And then we have to look after that to the summer and to see, okay, how can we carry on improving.
Hello, everybody. Next up, we travel up the A12 to Portman Road, where we will be hosted by Ipswich Town. Kick-off on Sundays at 4 p.m, and there are no engineering works on the line between London and Ipswich. Hurrah! So, Ipswich Town then. They were relegated a while back, though not quite as far back as Southampton. And in truth, it wasn't the greatest of surprises. It didn't look a particularly strong squad, and the additions made in closed season didn't really inspire a lot of confidence that this season might have been the start of a long stay upstairs. Their last win came away at Bournemouth, back at the beginning of April. Since then, they've played 7 times, losing 5 and drawing 2. The 2 draws both came away from home at Everton and Chelsea, both 2-2. Interestingly, they haven't picked up any points at home this year, their last win coming at the end of last year in a 2-0 defeat of Chelsea. With the draw they gained against the same opponents at Stamford Bridge a few weeks back, any chance of "can we play you every week" probably represented more of a genuine request than a taunt. If the transfers arriving in summer were less than inspiring, the winter arrivals had "resigned to our fate" stamped all over them. Daisy informs me that 4 players arrived, comprising 2 permanent deals and 2 loans. They shelled out about £20 million for Villa youngster Jadon Philogene, who had failed to make too deep an impression, having joined the club from Hull 12 months earlier. He scored 2 in 9 since pitching up in Suffolk. However, a medial cruciate ligament injury back in April has ended his season. The goalkeeping slot has long been perceived as a problem area, with Muric, whose errors included a pair that handed Southampton a rare victory, being well out of sorts and now injured, and Walton having injury problems as well. So they spent a not too massive £5 million to bring in West Brom custodian Alex Palmer on a 3-year deal. The first of the winter loan arrivals was former Everton defender Ben Godfrey, who, having left Goodison for Atalanta in the summer, found himself twiddling his thumbs in Bergamo, having made just the 5 appearances in Italy. However, since returning to Blighty, things have scarcely been much better, and he's been absent for much of his loan spell through a combination of injury, illness, and simply not being selected. The other loan arrival was Paraguayan Julio Enciso, who came in from Brighton having missed a fair chunk of last season through injury. That sounds familiar. The Paraguayan has scored twice in 11 games, and so his loan will be viewed as more successful than that of the planet's unluckiest player, Calvin Phillips. Phillips's loan spell in Suffolk has arguably been even less successful than his sojourn with us. His season is already over with an Achilles problem, and he will be spending his summer on the treatment table, wondering exactly how many mirrors he has broken in his career. Let us move on to the final wild and wacky world of association football of the season. One can only marvel at the sort of administrative genius that figured Mr. Stuart Atwell, a referee who somehow blundered his way through his entire career, lurching from one inexplicable decision to another, was suitably qualified to take charge of the FA's prestige event. Who'd have thought Atwell, who as long ago as 2009 was the subject of a Guardian article entitled "Is Atwell the Worst Referee in the History of the Premier League?", would have made such a mess of the FA Cup final. Everybody, that's who. PGMOL usually has 3 VAR options on this sort of occasion. Number 1 is to lie and say that what you saw just happen didn't happen at all. Or number 2, if what you saw just happen clearly contravenes the laws of the game, rewrite the laws of the game until what you saw just happen doesn't contravene the laws of the game. In this case, Jared Gillett, the match's designated cover-up boy, plumped for option 1. But surely, Percy, I hear you say, you mentioned 3 options. I did indeed. Option 3 is to actually tell the truth and point out that the referee messed up and make sure that the correct decision is made. One can only assume that due to some sort of printing error, that page has been left out of the VAR handbook. The refereeing was infinitely better in midweek when we had Europe's first all-Muppet Cup final. Much has been said about how the fact that 2 such poorly placed teams can get to a final is somehow indicative of the strength of the Premier League. I'd argue differently. I'd say that the change in format that makes it almost impossible for larger teams to get knocked out probably had more to do with both clubs' progress. The format, lest we forget, was a sop to those clubs that were threatening to set up their own so-called Super League. They'd also posited a system whereby if they had a poor season at home and fell outside the European qualification slots, they would be allowed to enter the competition anyway. Give it a few years, it'll happen. I watched a bit of the final, but it was really turgid stuff. I realised that nobody really cared who won, but it had been too much to us for either of the teams involved to give a damn. And so to us. Well, it wasn't just Wembley that saw the results of bad planning, was it? Some bright spark decided that a home match day would be a good day on which to hold a half marathon in the area. Now, I appreciate that fixtures change for TV, but by and large you know which weekends are home and which weekends are away. And the games would always take place somewhere between Friday and Monday. So that given that we were always going to be away the week before and the week after, it shouldn't have been beyond the wit of man to work out the difference. And to the runners themselves, just think, had you not been too lazy to run a whole marathon rather than just a half one, you'd have been 13 miles away at the end and not cluttering up my choice of pre-match libation hostelry. Just a thought. Now, I often get a lot of stick over my comments on the standard of refereeing in this country. I would point out that it's not referees per se with whom I have a problem. I'm sure some of them are splendid people who are very good to their mothers. What I do have a problem is the system we have in this country which puts the responsibility for the maintenance and improvement of standards in the hands of the referees themselves. The competency levels amongst referees have been plummeting ever since PGMOL came into existence. That was largely, by the way, as a result of having to help out a cash-strapped FA, who couldn't afford the costs of paying for professional referees. A position where the incompetent are promoted and protected and the criminally insane are ring-fenced from the consequences of their actions was predictable right from the start, as was the fact that the potential for VAR to shine a light on consistent underperformers would be ignored in favour for the use of the technology to cover up their failings. Talking of VAR, one wonders what the semi-automatic system used in Europe would have made of the situation on Sunday. It appears the one we use over here can't handle crowded penalty areas. That may be the same for the alternative system they have in Europe, but given the track record of the authorities in this country, my suspicion is that we went for the one that was cheaper rather than more effective. Anyway, to those who moan about my stance on referees, I would pose the following question. Do you think that the performance of Mr. Barrett was at an acceptable level at the weekend? Clearly, the FA and PGMOL do, as in a Kafkaesque postscript to the whole sorry mess, it has emerged that both clubs have been charged with failing to control their players. It's all a bit like the Terry Gilliam masterpiece Brazil, where a suspect arrested in a case of mistaken identity dies during questioning, and they send the family the bill for his interrogation. On the pitch, Areola's blunder, which, along with Barrett, proved to be the difference between the sides, spoilt what up to that point had been a reasonably good performance between the posts. The selection was somewhat bemusing, though. Arguably, we had 9 defensive players in the lineup, and the early exchanges apart, the first half saw us crying out for a more attacking lineup. The subs, I say, should have come at the interval. Bowen's goal was a bit good, but that game descended into farce as yellow cards were waved generally in the direction of anyone who happened to look at the hapless official in a funny way. To say that Barrett was out of his depth only tells part of the story. If truth be told, he'd probably have been out of his depth in a dried-up puddle. We said goodbye to Soufal, whose farewell video caused a few contact lens problems around here, and Cresswell, who was given generous applause when he came off before the end. Now, each to his own, but it's a feature of the state of the crowd at the Olympic these days that the only people who stood to applaud Cresswell's departure appear to be the dwindling band of regulars in my section. The tourists, of which there seem to be many, didn't know how to behave at the departure of a long-serving and dependable club servant, and steadfastly remained in their seats. Sign of the times. For this weekend, injuries of the standard Antonio and Somerville. Antonio's whereabouts for next season are in some form of flux at the moment. He apparently has a short-term contract offer on the table, but there are also rumours of better offers in the wings. We will see. Prediction? Well, we've been better away from home of late, and they haven't been very good at home. If someone could point out to the team that a win here sees us finish above the midweek Muppets, we should take all 3 points, though it may be just a little bit messy. So the £2.50 I was going to pay towards some form of training for our referees so they actually know the laws of the game, which is £2.50 more than PGMOL seems to have spent in its existence, will be placed on a wager for us to win 3-2 if that's okay with you, Mr. Winston. Enjoy the game and have a good summer if you must.